Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. It's John Thomas Hill here for the Rutherford Sports Network show, and I just wanted to touch base with y'all, mainly because I'm off work today and I needed to do a podcast. So, we're still in the pandemic. In case if some of you listen to this far in the future. We're still in the pandemic. It's early 2021, and there's some hope out there that things may be wrapping up on this, maybe middle of the year, maybe later on in the year. So my thoughts right now are turning towards the post-pandemic world to a degree. What's it going to be like? What can we expect and all this? How things will be changed. And sports is going to be one of those things that have changed to a great degree because of the pandemic. I think, in my viewpoint, I think there's going to be some major changes coming to the sports world because of this pandemic. And I'm going to address some of them. First off, I think the era of constantly seeing big new arenas and such are going to, at least for the next, I would say probably 10 to 20 years, you're going to see that curtailed a lot because a lot of budgets are going to be very constrained because of spending for this pandemic. And we've realized what the real needs are. Education's a very big need. Our hospitals are a very big need. And I think you're going to see a lot of public investment in both those. We're going to see, I firmly believe, a push towards Medicare for all, at least some version of it. And there's going to be a lot of public investment, and a lot of that's not, and there's going to be a backlash against any possible public spending towards new stadiums, new arenas, and such. So you're going to see a lot of these new stadiums be around for a while. A lot of stadiums that owners were looking to move to a new stadium and such. Like I think David Tepper, the owner of the Carolina Panthers, would ideally like to move out of Bank of America into a retractable roof stadium. Given the political climate that's going to come out of this pandemic, I firmly believe that any politician that tries to make any possible attempt to put public funding towards stadiums and arenas and such for pro athletes, no matter, and there has been very little, if any, proof that they actually do a lot of good economically. Because you hear all the time that there's going to be a lot of investment, blah 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 blah, and to a degree there is, but not nearly as much as promised. And I think in many ways you're seeing already that these stadiums, I should say, the people pushing these stadiums, they keep saying the same thing. We'll either move the team, or you build us a new stadium or a new arena, we'll move the team. I don't think it's going to fly anymore. Because A, I think the saturation point's being reached. B, I think that leagues are hungry for money, are going to go, well, there's going to be some expansion coming up. I firmly believe, because leagues are going to want money, and the quickest way to get that is expansion fees. And I think with Seattle coming into the NHL, there's obviously going to be a push to bring a Seattle NBA team. I think I could very well see the NBA and NHL benefiting the most from this pandemic, in the sense that there is going to be a push to bring more money into those two leagues. And I think expansion is the quickest way to do that. I think For the NBA, obviously, Seattle's a contender. You've got Las Vegas is obviously there. Louisville, I think, would make a great NBA town. And St. Louis is a possibility because the people that were behind the old Spirits of St. Louis have been getting a lot of money. But they basically, I don't know if any of the original owners are still alive anymore. And I think the time could very well come that they make the arrangement to that little deal they've got. I'd have to look back at it, but it's basically a situation where the NBA pays the Spirit of St. Louis X amount of money every year because St. Louis didn't get an expansion franchise. When the NBA and ABA merged, and the Pacers, the Nets, and the Spurs, and there's another team I'm thinking of, I can't remember it right offhand, that merged along with it, the Nuggets, that merged with the NBA. And when that happened, the Spirits of St. Louis were supposed to merge, but for some reason they didn't, and or something along the lines where the owners wanted to merge with the NBA, but the NBA didn't want a team for whatever reason in St. Louis, or they didn't think St. Louis could support the team. So there was that arrangement, that financial arrangement, whatever it is, and that's kept the NBA out of St. Louis. And St. Louis really only has right now the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team and the St. Louis Blues hockey team. And Missouri is a pretty good basketball state. So I could see very, very well, you could see another NBA team there. Kansas City's another contender. All Kansas City has are the Chiefs and the Royals right now. So there is a real need for professional sports in Kansas City. There is a desire there. I do believe, not necessarily need, but a desire there, and I think that could very well be filled by an NBA team. Now they had an NBA team back in the late '70s, early '80s. The Kansas City, it wasn't Royals, it was Kings, because they used to be the Rochester Royals. They moved to Cincinnati, and then they moved to Kansas City, and now they're Sacramento Kings. They're known as the Sacramento Kings. They were the Kansas City Kings until they moved to Sacramento in 1985. Well, now Kansas City has a brand new arena, or not brand new, but they've been around for a while. Great arena, an NBA-capable arena, and I really think and plus you'd have Oklahoma City as a rival. You'd have if they put a team in St. Louis as a rival. You'd have the Texas teams as a rival. So you could really build a lot of rivalries in that area with a team in Kansas City. Kansas City, St. Louis, and Louisville are obviously two areas that would benefit greatly from an NBA team. Raleigh, honestly, I could see it either way. I think the problem with that is you don't want to dilute it too much because the Canes are the only professional team in the Raleigh-Durham area. Major professional team in the Raleigh-Durham area. Whereas Charlotte has the Panthers and the Hornets. And there's no Major League Baseball team yet in the Carolinas. So you could theoretically make the case that Raleigh would be a great place for an NBA team. I'm not so certain that would necessarily work. And unless you had a situation where you knew you could get enough people in to go watch the NBA team and the Canes and NC State basketball. And it's not just a matter of money, it's a matter of how can you generate enough. Because if you bring an NBA team into Raleigh, that's going to hurt the Canes to a degree. And you know, they're for a while there, they were kind of holding on to a thread. There was a lot of concern that they would be moving. The Canes have been successful the last 2 or 3 years. And they've kind of, interest has peaked back up and all of that now in the post-pandemic era. It's going to be interesting to see not Panthers, but the Canes have got to be successful right out of the gate to keep the Raleigh-Durham market interested in the Canes, because if they slide back to kind of the mediocrity, that could potentially see a loss of fan attendance to the point where they may have no choice but to move. An NBA team would really hurt the Canes long term unless they generated more fan interest and such. The NHL is obviously there's a lot of contenders out there. You've got Quebec City, who used to have the Nordiques. They would really be great. I'm not sure if they've got the facility yet or not that would be NHL capable, but they definitely have the passionate fan base there. Plus, of course, you've got the rivalry with Montreal. Would the Canadiens want another team in the province of Quebec? That remains to be seen. They've got a monopoly now. Hamilton, Ontario would love an NHL team. I don't know if they've got a facility that's capable of holding an NHL team right now. They used to have the Copps Coliseum. I don't know how well that facility is nowadays, or if they build a new one. But I always remember Hamilton would have loved to have an NHL team and campaigned for one. It's just that the Toronto Maple Leafs lobbied hard against that. And they also lobbied hard against Ottawa getting an NHL team, but Ottawa got it because of they're the nation's capital. And it's hard. Ottawa Senators have had issues with attendance because Ontario is, while it's the most populous province in Canada, the Maple Leafs have a very, very strong fan base in Ontario. And it's awfully hard to break a fan base. It's like in New York City. Even though the Jets have won a Super Bowl and, the Giants have won 3, I'm sorry. No, I take that back, 4. I'm forgetting the 80s and early 90s. They've won 4. Sorry, Giants fans. Even though the Jets have a passionate fan base, New York's still a Giants town. Even though the Mets have a passionate fan base, have won a couple of World Series, have been to one recently as 2015, sooner than they're the most recent New York-based team that's been to the World Series. But yet, it's still a Yankees town. You've got the Nets, the Brooklyn Nets, who are contending for an NBA title, but yet it's still a Knicks town, and the Knicks haven't done anything in years. They're kind of looking like they might actually be halfway decent this year. And maybe, just maybe, turning things around, maybe. And in NHL, you've got 3 teams there. You've got the Islanders, you've got the Rangers, and you've got the Devils. Now, the Devils have won 3 Stanley Cups, I believe. The Islanders had that big dynasty in the 80s, but yet it's still a Rangers town. You saw what happened in 1994 when the Rangers won the Stanley Cup. If you talk hockey in the NHL about success, Rangers, even though they're at the bottom of the poll when it comes to Stanley Cups in the city of New York, when you talk about Stanley Cup in New York, which team comes to mind right off the bat? The Rangers. So, in the Toronto area, any team like the Senators is second best to Toronto. And a Hamilton team would be third best. Maybe could eventually get to second best. It's going to take a lot to knock off Toronto. In the United States, the problem is that we've had issues with teams not succeeding and the Arizona Coyotes have been rumored to be moving. I think that's been kind of quashed for now. I think they got a new arena deal or something like that. That for now, they're going to stay in Arizona. Atlanta's had 2 NHL teams in my lifetime. Both have moved to Canada. One to Calgary, one to Winnipeg. The Florida Panthers have been rumored from time to time to move, but right now I think the ownership has a pretty good deal, and they get enough attendance to where they basically are able to make headway. The Tampa Bay Lightning have been very successful, and success breeds people coming out to see your product, even though they may not understand it completely, like with the Carolina Hurricanes. And Tampa's pretty secure in their NHL team. Florida is more secure than they were just a few years ago. The Canes are, for now, pretty secure in Raleigh. It just depends on the next time they kind of have that little cycle where they're not quite as good as they are right now. The the Predators in Nashville, surprisingly, I think are, because besides the Titans, they're the only game in town, pro sports wise. Now, if Nashville were to get an NBA and Major League Baseball team, then I could very well see the Predators having issues with keeping fan interest, But I think long term, the Predators are pretty safe there. But the NHL could expand. I think there are some very obvious cities. You've got Cleveland, who've had it once before. They had the Barons, but they were there for like a cup of coffee, a couple of seasons, and then they folded, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Either that or they merged with another team. I'd have to look back at it. They definitely could play there, but Ohio doesn't really have a very passionate hockey history, and plus the Blue Jackets are the only game in town in Columbus, professional sports-wise, unless you consider the Columbus Crew, which MLS is still not quite there yet in my mind as the 5th major sport. They're getting close, but I think they've got potential to be in the next few years. One of these days, I might do a MLS podcast to talk about what they've got to do to really be the 5th major sport in America. Some will argue that's already the case. I don't necessarily agree yet. Okay. There is an obvious city that would deserve an NHL team. Is Milwaukee. Wisconsin's a very big hockey state. The AHL Milwaukee Admirals have been a factor for a long time now. They're very popular, and they could really, I honestly believe that they've got a great arena up there for the Bucks. Why not put the NHL there? Now, when you say that, you've also got to consider that the Minnesota Wild and the Chicago Blackhawks are in the same general area. They might push to keep a team out of Wisconsin. But at the same time, you put a team in Milwaukee, and you've automatically got a rivalry with Chicago and Minnesota. And I think that could be huge indeed. And, there are other cities, smaller markets that could potentially. Hartford had an NHL team for a long time. I think from 79 to 95. And the only reason they left was they couldn't get an arena deal. If Hartford gets a new arena, and there is, Hartford's in Connecticut. Connecticut's got a lot of money, a lot of people, a lot of money. They could potentially get an NHL team again. I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think mainly because the New York teams and plus the Boston Bruins would not want a competitor in their marketplace again. But it's conceivable. And when people talk about expansion, it's easy to talk about this without looking at the potential competitors. And that's part of the reason why you look at this. When you look at expansion of professional sports leagues, you have to look at not just if the potential market can sustain the team, but also the franchises in local nearby areas. Are they going to be impacted? Remember a few years ago when Washington didn't have the Nationals, and there was a passionate movement to bring Major League Baseball back to the nation's capital. The main reason it took so long is that the ownership of the Baltimore Orioles was very passionate about blocking it because they felt like if a team went to Washington, it would hurt the Orioles. Well, the Montreal Expos moved to Washington, and it's, in my opinion, not really hurt them that much. The only reason the Baltimore Orioles are hurting is because they don't have the success on the field that people would like, and that's the reason why they don't have the attendance that they would ideally like. And there's other economic factors that fall outside of sports. Baltimore is an industrial city that's struggled in the free trade era. It's a Rust Belt city that hasn't completely made the transition over to the newer economy, more service-based economy, as well as, say, other cities have. And, you know, the sad fact is Washington and Philadelphia are right between the two. And, yeah, it's not easy. But Baltimore, the Ravens are popular, the Orioles are popular there, obviously. Baltimoreans, I've known a couple, are very fiercely proud of their city. But you remember that. I remember it. I don't know if you remember it, but the Nationals have gotten a pretty big fan base in the nation's capital. Will it impact the Orioles long term? I doubt it. Because one of the things about having two professional teams close to each other is, yeah, from an economic standpoint, that is competition. But at the same time, competition can sometimes breed passionate rivalries and generate a lot of interest. You look at the New York teams. You look at the LA teams. You've got, the Clippers have been good for about a decade now. They've been a contender in the playoffs. But it's still a Lakers town. But there is that rivalry there. The Rams and Chargers, obviously, are still basically building their fan bases. In the case of the Rams, rebuilding their fan base. It does help you got a brand new stadium there that's state-of-the-art there that's going to be interesting to see. And we're going to talk about the new stadiums, how they'll have to deal with this post-pandemic era. And obviously you've got the Cubs and the White Sox and such. So hang on just a second. All right, I had to text somebody real quick. Here's the thing about arenas. We've got a bunch of new arenas and stadiums that are coming up. They're either completed and haven't been utilized yet, like with Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas and SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. It really sucks when you have a brand new stadium, you can't put fans there, or if you can't put too many fans in there. it's going to be interesting to see how this develops, because the NFL season, by the time the NFL season comes along, the vaccines should be more plentiful. You're going to have more people getting vaccines, but it remains to be seen if we can have full crowds at an NFL game come September. I would say you might very well see 50 to 75% capacity, where you have to have documentation that you've been vaccinated to get in. I could see that happening. The thing about all of this is that you're going to see a lot of major attempts by the professional sports leagues to generate revenue. And while there is going to be the temptation to raise prices, the problem with that is that if you raise prices in an economy that's already strained to begin with, that's going to alienate your fan base. So I can see, once the post-pandemic era hits and we're able to go out and do stuff again, I could see a lot of marketing and, to generate revenue outside of going to the stadiums and people getting there. A big factor is going to be the broadcast deals. They're going to be coming up real soon. And there's a lot of competition out there. It's not just the traditional broadcast networks anymore. It's not even the traditional sports cable and satellite networks anymore. Now you've got Netflix. Now you've got Hulu. Now you've got Amazon Prime. But the traditional broadcast networks also have it. You've got CBS with CBS All Access, which is going to become Paramount Plus next month, I believe. You've got NBC with Peacock. You've got ABC with ESPN Plus. Fox obviously has their own FS1, FS2, plus they have their own mobile service, but I think they're going to probably come out with their own version in the near future. I think they own a stake in Hulu, but I think that's a shared marketplace with Disney and such. So I could see Fox in the next 2 or 3 years, maybe sooner, launching their own streaming service, or partnering with, say, Netflix or Amazon Prime to share the wealth, so to speak. So the contracts are all coming up. In either they're coming up real soon, or they're going to be coming up in the next 5 years or so. And trust me, the pandemic's still going to be around. The post-pandemic era is still going to be around 5 years from now. And I think those are going to be majorly important deals, because there's going to be an ability for the leagues to ask a lot of money from the TV networks, because live content gets eyes. Live content gets ratings right then and there. The biggest problem broadcast networks have are getting people to watch shows right then with commercials they're airing there. In the streaming market, if you want to watch, say, NCIS, you don't have to watch the newest episode right at that particular time when they air it. You can watch it a couple of days from now, either on your DVR or on your popular streaming service once it drops on there. So, and people will wait until it drops on a streaming service so they can just go ahead and binge watch it. So in that aspect, the competition for viewers, live sports has a huge advantage. And the pro sports have a lot of following. That's going to generate a lot of interest from these networks because, the NFL wants top dollar. Major League Baseball wants as much as they can get. The NBA wants as much as they can get. The NHL definitely does. MLS, same deal. There is compelling evidence to suggest that there is a ceiling to this. You look at NBCSN is going to be shut down by the end of the year. It's folding into Peacock, basically. That does not bode well for CBS Sports Network because you've got Paramount Plus, and if CBS Paramount were to go, why do we have our own network when we can put this on Paramount Plus and get the same amount of viewers? I could see CBS Sports Network collapsing in the next year, although I think that there is a compelling argument to be made that somebody could come along and buy them before, not buy the network facilities and all that. That's going to still close anyway for NBCSN, but I could see Fox Sports 2 buying the spot on DirecTV where NBCSN is right now, because Fox Sports 2 right now is in the 600s, whereas NBCSN is in the 200s. And if you don't think that makes a difference, it does. Because the further you have to click scroll down on your DirecTV or whatever service you're using, or cable or whatnot, the less you're going to want to go to that channel. Because there's a lot of channels you have to go through. You might go, I want to watch this instead. So trust me, Fox Sports 2 would love to have NBC SN spot. And not just, let's remember, it's not just sports networks that would cover a higher spot. But CNN is in the 200s. Fox News is in the 600s. Even though Fox News was the ratings leader amongst cable news networks, they have subsequently struggled, and we're going to talk about that in another podcast, not this podcast, but another one, why that is. So there's the post-pandemic era is going to be interesting because the economy will rebound. How fast remains to be seen. And sports are going to be part of that. Now, we've talked from time to time here about the fact that high school sports and college sports, especially small college sports, are in competition with the pros and such, because it's easier to sit at home and watch a game than it is to go to a game, whether it's a high school game or a college game. And it's a known fact that unless you're in a very passionate high school football state like Florida, Georgia, Texas, whatever, high school football isn't the in thing to do on Friday nights in the fall anymore. Because if there's stuff you can watch on TV, especially stuff that's really, really good, you're going to go see it. You're going to sit there at home, watch an NBA game or an NHL game or Major League Baseball game on a Friday night instead of going to the local high school football game. So you're going to see a lot of minor league professional sports tactics used more and more on the college level, and especially minor colleges like Division II, Division III, community college, high school sports, to generate interest, because those are vital revenue generating sports. The truth is, in many states, high school football generates the funds for professional sports. I'm sorry, for other sports, non-revenue generating sports. This is true in college sports. This is true in Division II, Division III, JUCO, and especially in high school. The fact that we've not had revenue-generating sports because of the pandemic, like football, and to a degree, high school basketball can be in certain areas. But in general, the only profitable sport in high schools are football. That's why it's really hurt some states where they couldn't have the crowds that they once had. So when this fall comes along and the vaccine is out and people, you're going to have to see a lot of the high school football teams in states that are not, where it's not a passion, like around here. They're going to have to find a way to get people to come to the games. And that's going to hurt because, especially in rural areas like where I'm living at in Rutherford County, North Carolina, you're going to have to find a way to get people who may not have a whole lot of money to come out after a hard day's work to go to a high school football game that they have no family members playing or anything like that, and to come to that game. How do you do that? Obviously giveaways. Obviously, you have to find a way to make the experience to where people will want to come out. You know, not just bands after the game, but not high school bands, but not just high school bands, but you could potentially see local bands play after the game or before the game. Make it an experience. If I were a high school student right now, I could see myself like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 35 years ago, tapping in the potential. Because I was wanting to be a sportscaster back then, but I kind of knew some sports, a little bit of sports marketing and such. And you got to generate the revenue. And, you know, especially in minor league sports this coming season and in 2022, they're going to have to really, really bring in the crowds to make up for the loss of revenue. And especially since minor league baseball, Major League Baseball has said, we're only going to support 120 minor league clubs. Whereas before they were doing 160. That is affiliations from the Major League Baseball. Now I think in time that's going to change. Political pressure is going to be, once the economy rebounds and politicians are like, well, why can't the major leagues go back to the way it was? I really think that you could very well see a renaissance in minor league sports in the next 10 years because, and the reason I say that in the post-pandemic era is that people want to get out. They're sick and tired of sitting at home. And this is going to rebound against the streaming services. We've been under a virtual lockdown for about a year now. It'll be a year in March. A year next month, ironically enough. And once the pandemic is over with, there is going to be a desire to get out and do stuff. Whether it could be something as simple as going to a high school football game or a basketball game. And that is where you've got to capture the market very quickly. You've got maybe a year or two. And I think if you're a high school athletic director and you want to build up your fan base, you want to build up interest in your team, you better think of some very good ideas very quickly because you're going to have a window of maybe 2 years to get it done. when the economy starts to slowly rebuild and people have the confidence to go out again and do stuff and all this, you really need to build that interest. And it's, especially if you're a junior college or small college, you really need to get out there and be ready to go. Have an idea of what you want to do, because once the economy starts rebounding and people want to get out and go, they feel safe enough to get out, and they feel like they can do it. They've got money in their pocket. They've got, it's not just a matter of money. It's a matter of confidence. Going out, going, hey, we can go back in crowds again. I feel safe about going out in crowds, especially if you're someone that is immunocompromised. I can't say that word. And not to necessarily the degree that you have to freak out about everything, but to the degree where you can go out safely, like you did before the pandemic. You just have to take some precautions and such. Be a little extra careful. So there is going to be that rebound. There's going to be that desire to get out and do stuff, especially amongst people who didn't necessarily want to do it before. They weren't necessarily going out all the time. They really want to go out when they get the money and either spend the money they've been saving from the stimulus and all this, and but once the economy starts to rebound and jobs start getting back into the marketplace and people are working again and all this, they want to get back into going to sporting events and movie theaters and all this. There's going to be that market. You've got to market it. You got to find a way to get it done. Now, the one thing about, I'm looking at the post-pandemic era in short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Short-term is 1 to 2 years after the pandemic subsides. Medium-term is 2 to 5 years, maybe 7. Long-term, 7 to 10, 20 years down the road. And let's remember, there is always a risk that this could come back. And that is the one thing about all of this that we're all going to have to be very mindful of. What if this happens again? How do we deal with it? Now, government obviously is going to have to find a way to deal with this, because the last thing a politician wants to be is to cut back on pandemic coverage, especially in the future. I think it's safe to say that you're going to see a lot of spending to prevent something like this from ever happening again. That is definitely going to be one of those things that it's going to be a long time before you have any politician go, we need to cut back on pandemic funding. That's not going to happen anytime soon. Because see what it's done to our economy. See what it's done to the entire world. And in many ways, it's scared the crap out of a lot of businesses. Because and let's face it, there are a lot of businesses that have failed. Small, medium, large. There are businesses that will never recover from this. Movie theaters will never recover from this unless they find a way to attract an audience again by basically going from just going, well, we're just showing the new movies, to where they make it an experience-based event, to where it's not just going to a movie, but going to a dinner and then a movie in the same building. Like with the Big E down in Gaffney. It's an entertainment complex with an arcade and bowling and other things. They've got they've got a cafe there. like a movie theater, but there's a lot of, it's not just a movie theater. So if the movie industry is going to survive, they've got to find ways to expand beyond just being a movie theater. And that's the key. That's the future right there. You've got to find a way to expand your business just beyond. And that's going to be the challenge for sports and any entertainment. Because we've realized we don't need it. Deep down inside, we don't need it. And that's going to resonate because we're going to go, all these rich athletes and rich actors and such, I don't really need to support them because they're spoiled, blah, 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 blah. That's in our mindset right now, in some people's mindset right now. So, as much as I talk about the potential boom and such, there's also the fact that a lot of folks are going, I don't know if I want to spend money on these people that are making all sorts of money. So I could see salaries, at least for the short to mid-term, plateau. Owners are going to be more stingy because they don't have the revenues coming in. Leagues are going to be more stingy with their expanding their salary cap. Players, as the market dictates, are going to want to capitalize. The reason salaries have gone up is because, for the most part, the market there's been no ceiling. I mean, I remember over 30 years ago, when it was a huge shock that Rickey Henderson got 3 years, $9 million to play baseball. And now that would be nothing. That would be some bench warmer who is a pinch hitter and a platoon guy and all this, that's got potential to be something more. It's basically a rookie deal, essentially, to a degree. Nowadays, you've got players making $40, $45 million a season. That's crazy. And the reason for that is that these athletes know they've got a very small window of opportunity to make this money. And they're business people. They've got business people around them. They know they've got 10 years. An elite athlete has 10 to 15 years to make as much money as they can get. And in that situation, you've got maybe 2, 3, 4 contracts. So they got to make that money in that window. And you take a look at the next here, the good but not great athletes. They're going to want to make as much money as possible. And, that's every athlete. Now that you've got an era that coming up where people are going to, even though they want to spend money, they have a lot of ways to spend their money. They may not necessarily want to spend it on you. And there's a lot of other avenues out there they can spend it on. Instead of going to an NBA game, they could go to a high school basketball game where the players aren't getting paid, or at least aren't supposed to get paid. But the post-pandemic era is going to be one, in my viewpoint, where the economy is going to expand, but the choices to spend that money are going to be very important for the long-term health of the economy, in the sense of not just in overall, but in general sectors. And the entertainment industry is going to have to cater to this, because they have a marketplace where there are some people who are openly hostile to certain elements of the entertainment industry and sports industry because of politics. And it's not that they want the athletes to necessarily change being from the political. They just want the athletes and entertainers to not be political. But once you're in that arena, it's awfully hard to get out. And that's another thing about the post-pandemic era. We've had the BLM and the major political issues that happened last year. Athletes that would normally have not been politically involved, became politically involved. Entertainers, same deal. There's going to be a movement in the next 5 to 10 years where I guarantee you're going to see athletes and actors and musicians and whatnot decide to move into the political arena. That's a double-edged sword. These are going to be people that are not necessarily going to be the most elite. You're not going to see LeBron James running for president or anything like that, or even for Congress. But someone who is recognizable among NBA fans or NHL fans or Major League Baseball fans or NFL or whatnot. But they're not necessarily Hall of Fame or anything like that, but they're respected and they're going to be, but they've been politically active already. They're going to move into the political arena. So I could see a lot of changes in the next 10, 20 years politically. Where you've got a lot of athletes, a lot of entertainers who have been around, who are not necessarily raking in huge, gigantic swaths of cash, but they have a recognizable fan base. They've been politically active on social media. Their opinions are well known. Their positions are well known. I could see that becoming a thing in the post-pandemic era, where you see, and on both sides of the political spectrum, but mostly on the liberal side. And we'll get into that one of these. One of the things I'm going to try to do the next couple of days is talk about the post-pandemic era that's coming. This is the sports version of it. I'm going to talk about the entertainment version of it maybe later today, maybe tomorrow, and then the political version of it soon enough. So the one thing about the post-pandemic era that's coming up, and I'm going to wrap it up, is this. We have this, and we have this need to want to get out and get back with people. Unless you're really, really introverted, even mildly introverted people want to go out to a ball game or to a concert or to a movie or to something with other people being around. So you're going to see a very short burst once the all clear is given. The question comes up now, what happens after that? What happens in the midterm, 2 to 5 years, 2 to 7 years? Or, once the initial feeling of, yay, we beat this thing, now we can go out and do stuff again, is over. How do you sustain the success? How do you sustain your business? Whether it be pro level, college level, high school level. What is the political climate going to be? Are you going to have politicians on both sides that are going to go, well, we don't need to spend public funding on arenas and other things. And it could go down to the college and high school level. They go, maybe we don't need to have all these sports teams. There's going to be a lot of talk in the next few years, once we're past the post-pandemic era, about priorities. And I could very well see a lot of changes. There's a lot of sports that have been eliminated because of the pandemic that people thought would come back once the pandemic are over with, may never come back. Or it may be a lot longer. And you're going to have universities, people in these universities who may not necessarily be fans of athletics go, well, that money could be better spent on internship programs and other academic programs or student support programs that aren't just about sports. So there is the potential, especially if there is the movement in the universities and colleges to shift away from specializing in sports and using a lot of that money towards things that universities are actually supposed to use them for. So, and I've said this before, we will not know until 20 years down the road what the pandemic era has really impacted us. Because big events like this change the way you think. They change your routines, they change your perceptions. World War II changed us. The Vietnam era changed us. 9/11 changed us. What's this going to change us? That remains to be seen. It remains to be seen what we are going to become in the next decade or two after this pandemic is over with. Always remembering, and this is going to play a factor too, that there is always the potential that this could happen again, and a lot sooner than another century. Because people are much more mobile than they've ever been. And the fact is that you're going to see in the next 10 years, because people haven't been able to travel for a year now, there's going to be a desire to get out and do stuff. And there's going to be people who go, whew, I made it through the pandemic era, I want to really live and knock off. So there's going to be a lot of travel, an insane amount of travel. The tourism industry, once this is all over with, is going to be, it may not recover initially for the first year, maybe the next 2 years. But once the overall confidence in traveling and getting out again, you're going to see a massive surge in tourism. Can sports be a part of that? Yeah. That means you're going to actually have to have stadiums become experiences. It's not just a game anymore. It's an experience. Like going to a theme park. Like going to a museum. You want it to be an experience. You want to just not just go to the game. You want to go to the stadium for a concert before the game, and to go to have a meal before the game. You want to be able to do stuff after the game, maybe to go to a concert after the game, to dinner after the game, to whatever after the game. So there is going to be a lot of changes. There's stuff that's going to be taking place. It was just starting out before the pandemic hit. There's stuff we don't even realize is going to happen after the pandemic. And there's a lot of volatility. A lot of stuff that could very well change. I've talked about expansion. The truth is, if the economy doesn't grow as fast and people are more conservative with their money after this pandemic is over with, you could potentially see Worst case scenario, and I don't think this is really going to happen. Contraction. Let's face it, there are, and I'm going to give you the reasons for it and the reasons against it. The reasons for it is the leagues are going to go, well, maybe we shouldn't expand as much. Maybe we should instead contract and have fewer teams and concentrate on the teams that are really making the money for the leagues. There are teams in Major League Baseball who lost money. There are Major League Baseball teams. There are NBA teams that lost money. There are NHL teams that lost money. And if you're constantly losing money in a business enterprise, you either change the way you do things, you either move to a location that gives you a better chance to generate more revenue, or you close shop. Now, we've talked about expansion here. And expansion is a steam valve that a struggling franchise can, instead of folding, can move to a new location and survive. But what if the economy doesn't recover as fast and takes a long time, maybe 5 to 10 years, to fully recover from this? Which is possible. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's going to rebound a lot quicker than that. What if it takes a lot longer? It could be a lot rougher. We haven't seen folding of professional sports teams in this country since the 1970s. I think the last one that folded were the Cleveland Barons, as I talked about earlier, in the NHL. I may be mistaken about that, but in my lifetime as a sports fan, I don't know of any major professional franchise in the big four sports that have actively folded, that have actually stopped doing business. They've either moved and changed their name and all that, or they found a way to survive. They've changed ownership, they got a new arena, but there's not been a major. There's been a threat of it. Remember, a few years ago, was about 20 years ago, that the Minnesota Twins and the Montreal Expos almost folded. And the only reason they didn't fold was that there was the potential that those teams could be moved to markets where they could make more money. Montreal eventually moved. Minnesota didn't. Minnesota got their new stadium, and that new stadium became very popular. It's Target Field, and the one thing about Minnesota is they've been inside all winter long. They can go outside of the baseball game in the summertime, and that's why that's very popular in Minnesota. So that's why the Twins have had their renaissance. Even though they may not have necessarily had the success in the field that they would have liked, at the turnstiles they've done very well for themselves. Because for a while there, it didn't look good. And we're going to talk about this sometime in the near future, about why in the 70s you had a lot of multi-purpose stadiums, and why eventually that became a huge problem. As a matter of fact, the last multi-purpose stadium is still existing, but it's no longer a multi-purpose stadium. It's got one purpose now. And that was the old Oakland Coliseum, whatever they call it now. Once the Raiders left, it's now just the A's. And you don't have any multi-purpose stadiums anymore that I can think of. That is, that there's more than one professional sports there. Now, not including soccer yet. Because if you include soccer, there are a few that... But it's easier to convert a football field to a soccer field than it is to convert a football field to a baseball field. Because in baseball, you've actually got dirt on the infield. And, yeah. It's a lot easier to convert a soccer stadium to a football stadium. So you could conceivably say, yeah, there's still multi-purpose stadiums. What I mean by multi-purpose stadium is a baseball, football stadium. And there used to be a bunch of them. And now there's not. Because it was shown to be not as cost-saving as they thought. And we're going to talk about that one of these days because it started out as a good idea, turned out to be a pretty bad one. But I'm going to end it there. Let me wrap it up by basically saying this. We live in very interesting times, to say the least. These may be the most volatile times we've had in this country since the 60s and 70s. And there's no guarantee that we're going to have this end soon where there is that sort of like that the 80s come along, oh, we're back in our stride again. We're back to being good old USA, golden era, blah, 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 blah. There's no guarantee that the late 2020s, or 2030s will be that. No guarantee at all. Because the volatile 60s turned into the volatile 70s. And there's no guarantee that... And remember, and I was born in 71. There are people older than I am that were born in the late 50s, early 60s that probably could tell you a lot more about how volatile the 60s and 70s really were. So I'll leave it to them. But to me, being a history buff, I kind of know about it. That's sort of like the thing that interests me is from the post-war era to now. The stuff that we didn't learn about in history class. Because usually U.S. history class would end at the Second World War. And they'd kind of jam a little bit of post-war stuff in there. They kind of go, it's 75 years after the end of the Second World War. A lot has happened in 75 years. So one of these days on the other podcast I do, I'll talk about that. Why we need to teach more about that. Maybe we need to split up U.S. history into 2 years so that people understand what modern American history is all about, why it matters. Well, I have gone a long time. And I didn't expect to go this long. But thank you very much for joining us. Or me. There is no us here, it's just me. Little old me. In my little home office. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hope it gave you some food for thought. And look at the John Thomas Hill podcast because I will be doing, like I said earlier, an entertainment version of this probably tomorrow, maybe later today. I'm not sure. Depends on how I feel. And then a political one. The political one will probably be very volatile. If you can imagine, it's not going to get any easier anytime soon politically. Let's just admit that. But that's it for now, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed this. And as we like to always say, good night, good luck, and may the good news be yours.